All right, by my time here, I've got 8:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Large Vehicle Preventive Maintenance Program presented by NYMER. My name's Jay Lewandowski. We also have on the line David Bloodgood. If you have any questions or anything in time, there's a little thing on the screen. You can scroll down or slide down to it, and you can see that you can type in a question. We'll do our best to answer, or we'll ask Ty at the end. Ty McLenithan is the Washington County DPW Shop Supervisor, and he'll be leading the training today. But before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that if you registered for this class, you will get a certificate. However, if you are watching with someone, you will not get a certificate. So we strongly recommend you pass around a sign-in sheet, and when the certificate comes, staple the sign-in sheet to the certificate to show those that were there who were not specifically registered were able to take the class. Now, we are recording this one today, and we're hoping to reschedule one. We understand some of our friends out in the western part of the state and various parts of the state have run into a little bit of that four-letter word that I don't like to say too much. It begins with S and ends in now. So we're going to try and we're going to record this one, and we're also going to try and reschedule, get another one out here before all is said and done. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ty McLenithan, and we'll get this thing started up.
Thanks for inviting me. We're starting off with the vehicle inspection program here and the many facets of it. I think the most important thing is the DVIR process, and that's probably definitely where we'll start. The DVIR is the basis of your whole program. What it does is gives you an indication of what's wrong with your equipment. You can move forward from there. I think it's most important to set up this program based on everybody has a different fleet. You know, some of you have several buildings or several different departments, and you have to set this program up so you can make it work and make it safe. Pre-trip and post-trip inspections obviously are the basis of it. Each driver should have a checkoff sheet that you guys create, or you can purchase them, or however you can create them, tailor them to your own fleet. And every morning or afternoon, whatever your driving is, each driver has to fill one out for the same vehicle. 3 different drivers, 3 sheets a day. It's important that these are turned in a timely manner so that your maintenance or whoever's in charge of your repairs get these. You don't necessarily have to have a mechanic sign off on them, but you have to have a competent person, you know, to handle these and determine what needs to be repaired right away. You know, is a light bulb out or flickering that can be addressed later? Those things are also things that you need to set up and have a process and a program that everybody knows, that the drivers all know, to move forward with the repairs. Not necessarily everything that's a defect is an out of service item. Those items, you know, you need to have your own process, and everybody's understanding that everybody knows what's out of service and in service. Here's your benefits of a strong PM and program based off your DVIR is definitely less downtime, hopefully lower maintenance costs, longer asset life, fewer interruptions, safer vehicles, and I also like to add maybe a higher end vehicle cost at the end of the term that you own a vehicle, you sell it or wherever, moving forward. This also protects you. If you have a well-documented program, it protects you. God forbid you have an accident or something ends up in court. This is what definitely protects you. If you change a windshield wiper, you should document it. Your miles, your hours, all that needs to be recorded. It sounds like an awful lot of work, but it's a lot better than a $500,000 lawsuit. Documentation is the essence. You must obviously be responsible to define the aspects of it. Who gets the write-up? Is it maintenance supervisor? If it's in a separate building, it'd have to be the foreman, you know, whoever's in charge of the drivers needs to receive these write-ups, and they have to be addressed in a timely manner. Out of service criteria, you know, you set up your own criteria. Obviously, anything that's unsafe, you just can't drive. You can't pick and choose. You know, if you got a ripped mud flap, yes, you can finish the day, if, you know, or a flickered light, something along those lines. Not something like you know, a leaking brake hose, or, you know, you have to use common sense. You have to protect your municipality. You can't allow unsafe vehicles on the road. The determination should be by a competent person with maintenance background and you know, good insight. Retention of records. This is very important too. If anybody's ever been involved in a accident or a claim or any of that type, this is huge. 3 years, 3 months. DVIRs need to be kept for 90 days. I know several companies and municipalities keep them a lot longer than that. We keep them here at Washington County for 7 years. The time needed for a notice of claim to be filed is the 3 months. So that's probably why in this instance we refer to that. If a claim is filed, they must be kept for 3 or more years. Vehicle repair logs must be kept a minimum of 12 months by federal law, even if the vehicle is sold, meaning your repair orders, your work orders where you change the tires, change the oil, inspected the vehicle, all that stuff must be kept by 12 months, even if the vehicle is sold. Typically, people keep them longer. Checklist. Checklists are good because if you forget something, you know, you go down through, we use the checklist on our DVIRs and on our in-shop PM program, because it helps to remind you, you know, so many things that you can forget so easily when you're checking the truck over. Give an instance, the windshield wiper squirter is something you typically don't think about, you know, when we're servicing the truck, but boy, you get up in the cab, you're checking the lights, the dash light, oh yeah, hit the windshield wiper squirter, only the right side's working. And when do you remember it? When it's snowing out and you turn it on and you can't clear the windshield. So checklists are a great asset, and I recommend them highly. This is a PM list that, when I say we made it, our shop, we let the mechanics have some input. This document has probably been changed several times. We add stuff that typically, let's say there's a breakdown on the road, and you know, we really ought to check this because it could have prevented this breakdown. So we'll add it to the PM sheet. It used to be a lot smaller. It's amazing how it's grown. But and this is just for the chassis. We also have a separate one for the different types of bodies on our trucks. The circle inspection might include the body on it, but the maintenance we have a separate sheet for, tailored to that specific body, whether it's an auger body or a side dump. But those change periodically too. Highly recommend it. You noticed it was all check marks. And the mechanic, when he checks it off, you know, if there's if he made any repairs, he puts an X next to it, and then he'll sign off that he repaired it. In our particular department, on our work orders, we document each one of those repairs separately. We call it different sections. It's not necessary, as long as you document it any way you can, even on a pad of paper. If each truck has a book and you, for the smaller departments, and you document the repairs by year of that vehicle, you're documenting your repairs. You don't have to get fancy, but you do have to record the miles and the hours on that vehicle when you do that repair. You're trying to show consistent maintenance. That's an important thing in an accident, or an accident doesn't necessarily have to be hitting another vehicle. It could be personal injury on your own machine. You have to show consistent maintenance. This is the very first thing on our PM sheet. Typically, they do this in the driveway in good weather before they pull the truck in, and the mechanic will hop in the truck and check all this stuff. Some of this stuff is a little bit, it may seem tedious, but on our winter inspection, we try to make sure everything is in tip-top shape. And it doesn't necessarily mean everything's perfect when it leaves. There might be an X that says it has to come back. I'll give you an example. We had a camera that failed, and it was a cable. And that cable's on back order. I'll see it in 2 weeks. We let that truck go back in service. It was a camera that, it's not a backup camera. It was used for the wing, so it was safe to use, and we let the truck go out. It's doesn't mean your truck's out of service. Here again, use common sense and get the truck back in when you get the parts and repair it. The circle inspection, this we do in the garage normally. They throw all the lights on. Typically, they'll grab another mechanic to do this, or a driver if the driver's there. And all this stuff, they check it all over. Reflective tape is another thing that we've even had new equipment that come in with not enough tape on it. It's 75% of the side of the truck is supposed to have reflective tape. And if anybody had lights go out or you're going down the road and see a 48-foot trailer on the side of the road, your headlights hit it, you know how important it is. It does make that vehicle shine if you lose your lights or whatnot. And it's typical on plow equipment with the salt and stuff for lights to go out. Keeps it, keeps the driver safe, keeps the public safe. All this stuff, like once again, is just documenting. You're documenting that you're checking your vehicle. This is a document that certainly would be called into question in court in an accident or any other type of thing, legal matter. I gotta say, this is probably at the top of the list for municipalities doing what we do. That's looks like a battery starter wire. Typically, this is what burns down buildings. We've had one half a mile from here that burnt down right to they lost everything. I think they saved a mower tractor and a truck out of that building. This is something that you really need to spend time on. That the wire loom that you see, that plastic covering over those battery wires, you really, once a year, you should maybe possibly even more. You take your finger, there's a slice in that plastic loom. You're feeling for bulges. If there's any type of bulge in that battery cable, there's an issue. That means you've got some corrosion going on. And when that corrosion gets enough to split the plastic wire cover on that cable, that's when you have the ground out and you're building, the vehicle grounds itself out, and you got 1,000 amps of batteries, and it doesn't take more than a minute, and you got a heck of a fire. This is probably the most important thing on your PMs, and basically it's you can lose everything you own inside that building by not doing this. If you don't feel confident doing it, once a year, take it to a dealer, have them inspect your battery cables and document it. It could protect you and put it on their insurance, not yours. But definitely disassemble and clean all your battery cables, check your fuse connections. We use a CompuSpread, which is a computer sanding. It controls your sander and your brining system and all that. There's many different ones out there, Dickie Johns, and just make sure all your wires are clean on that. That was why that's on there. That was a road call at 2 in the morning. You know, my computer quit, and all it was a little bit of green corrosion on a battery or a fuse connection. We run vibrators on our dump boxes, and they green up, and the breakers get green. We try to be a little proactive on them. When they're in the shop, clean them up, fix them. Another issue we've had with the vibrators recently is any of you guys switching over to stainless steel bodies, we've had to run a ground from the chassis to the body because the hinge pin wasn't running enough ground to run the vibrators, and it's just another thing to check. Battery hold downs, very important. Keep your batteries tight. Not only does it keep your wires from moving and loosen up, it saves your batteries. Those batteries, they get jammed around, they don't last very long. Clean up your grounds. Your grounds on the frame, you know, they may not look corroded, but periodically they should be unbolted. Take some sandpaper or a little air tool, clean them up, put them back on, spray them back down. We do load test all our batteries. That's also recorded, and we typically probably 6 or 8 batteries on a PM. You know, is not uncommon. We swap them out before we have a problem if the cold cranking amps is low. Steering boxes, steering box bolts, and the mountings on a plow truck, the weight they carry on the front end, those bolts periodically loosen up. You always want to take your hand and try to move those big bolts, and if they're loose, tighten them up, because you don't want that hole egging out and having a whole bigger problem. Another issue, I've seen it quite a bit, the steering stops that are on your axle, they'll loosen up and turn in. The front tire can't rub on your drag links. If you see the paint gone on, well, even on your pitman arms, you have to adjust those steering stops to prevent that. If that happens, that is a definite out of service in DOT's eyes. Any paint missing on the pitman arms or drag links, you have to adjust the steering stops down on your hubs there, but you know, and against your front ends, and they have to be adjusted. And I've even seen quite a bit where those steering stop bolts have actually loosened up and fallen out of the front end, and we've had to replace them. Power steering lease, very obvious thing. If you note it, generally you'll see that on the ground, you know, when you're checking your oil, and you definitely don't want to do this on the side of the road with a plow on it, because that typically is when it happens to us. A lot of manufacturers have switched to metal power steering lines, and they're pot metal, and they rust out quick. We're proactive on that, and unfortunately they're pretty expensive. Hood hinges, that goes by manufacturer. Some hood hinges you never bother, but we've opened the hood and had the hood basically almost fall on the driver or the mechanic. They rust out where you don't see inside, you know, and you really want to look them over. Unfortunately, they're expensive, and we do change a lot of them. Steering shafts and linkages, I kind of covered that. Make sure they're tight. We use pliers and squeeze them. Any in play up and down, they should be replaced. A lot of guys will take the steering wheel and have somebody rock it back and forth and check for loose tie rod ends. That's not the method I endorse, but it's better than nothing if you don't have the big pliers. Front springs, shocks, shackles, and hangers. I probably don't tell any of you guys about the front springs with the weight typical plow trucks carry. We change more than our fair share. And you know, it's something you want to be proactive on. If a leaf comes out, it can take a tire out, and we leave a leaf in the road, it can do a lot of damage to the public's cars. So that's something on your pre-trip you should stress with your drivers to check the front springs, all your springs, but typically the front springs are what we see a lot. Front hubs on we jack up the front end to do this, and it's just it's a better way to check your front end. You can check for looseness and things of those when it's up in the air, and spin your wheels. You can listen to wheel bearings, and if they got you know, if you got two wheels and you spin them, they're not making the same noises. There's typically something wrong with one of them. But you can look in there and check your front drums while you're spinning it. And what I mean by that, when you spin the wheel, if there's drag in a certain spot, in other words, it doesn't spin freely and it does in one spot, maybe you have a warped front drum, and that's something that should be pulled apart and checked. Very important things. If you have a driver telling you that his brakes are pulsing, it's probably the wheel it's doing it on. So those types of things you really need to look at for, you know, your driver safety and the public's. We record all our front brake thicknesses. There again, it's just documenting you're doing a good service, and it's hard to repudiate that in a claim. You know, if you have all this information, this is what we check, this is on our periodically, and this is how we do it, you're reducing liability. This is the chart we use to record you know, the brake material and the brake stroke. The brake stroke is when you apply the brakes on your truck, and typically you have to see what brake chambers are on your truck. If they're long or short stroke, because there's a different measurement for each. If you have any question with that, you know, call your dealer or competent maintenance shop. As long as you know what size your chambers are, and if they're long and short stroke, they can tell you the maximum stroke. Or, you know, our DOT policemen, they're helpful. They'll help you out. At least in our area, they do. And this is just, again, you're documenting that you're doing a good service. And on that, you know, if you guys don't do your own service, or gals don't do your own services, if you farm them out, you can still create your own PM sheet and have that repair shop or dealership check it off. It's just documenting that they checked it, and it's still, you know, you're reducing your liability. Tires and wheels, probably dollar for dollar is a great way to save money. And on this subject, I'll say that's something that's not on here. Any of you folks that run recaps, typically we won't run a recap after the 7th year or cap it. And we've noticed a huge decrease. We did that 3 years ago, and blown tires, especially when we're blacktopping. We haul a lot of our own blacktop. We went from 10 or 12 flat tires down to maybe one that second year that we went through all and checked all our tires. All this stuff's very important. There again, you're checking your air pressures and recording them, and that's another thing. It's just liability, and you're also saving your municipality money. Valve stem caps, you got to have a valve cap. That's a DOT that's mandatory. I believe it's 10% in the same axle is what DOT allows. A lot of guys like to run their tires a little softer for a better ride, but believe it or not, it can be out of service. if you got a 120-pound tire, it's rating on the side of the tire and you're running it at 100 pounds because it rides nice, yeah, that's an out of service now. Inspecting your tires and recording the tire tread depth, you're just documenting again. Mismatched tread. You know, on older trucks, I'm not going to say that we don't run mismatched tread, but we do use a tire mating square. If they're the same height and you're trying to finish off some tires in the summer, as long as they're the same height and you know that, it's, you know, it's not uncommon, but we don't do it as a, we might have one truck that has it, it's a spare truck, you know, we don't run it on our frontline trucks. Wheel cracks and looseness, obvious reasons, you know, especially cracks in between the lugs. We're seeing most of our wheel cracks, obviously, on the right side of the truck where the wing is, and in the rear, probably because our shoulders, you know, the two of the tires will run on the road and the other one's off on the shoulder when they're cleaning. We break a lot of inside rims on the right side, on the rears, probably 4 to 5 a year. And when we send all our rims out to get reconned, and they'll typically find cracks that we can't see with the naked eye when they sandblast them. Probably 20 a year get rejected. They bring them back to me with the cracks in them, and it's definitely it's an issue in at least in our municipality, unfortunately. There again, we're just documenting you're protecting yourself. This is we measure the tread depth and the tire pressure. Looks like they should have been changed a long time ago, those. But there again, it's an important thing to do. In the engine compartment, any leaks obviously is not good. We check all this stuff. Seems, you know, fairly logical. I think most municipalities, probably their engines are well taken care of. Most municipalities change their oil real regular. We do take samples here. We don't typically change the oil during our typical winter service. We go by an hour and a mileage regiment. Some trucks might be on a short jag and they're running more than they're driving. So if they hit the hour mark first, we change it, you know, by the hour. And if they hit the mileage mark, we change it that way. We're fortunate we have a fuel system that requires the drivers to put their mileages in, and we get weekly hour readings. DBIRs is a way we also receive the hour readings. So it's work to keep up on it, but you're saving yourself money down the line with engine damage and stuff like that. Now on the rear end, you see where the diff filter, always change it. We change that diff filter or that differential filter because of rust. With our salt and brine environment, we have center discharges. It was a road call. It couldn't go. They only recommend changing that once a year, but once we get through the salt season there, and we were seeing them, in March or April, they were leaking. So we just change them whenever. It's $3 filter. You can't go out and change it for $3, on the side of the road. So that's why that's on there. Coolant filters, manufacturer recommendations. Look at your engine. It's pretty much every engine's available online if you do a little research, or you can call your dealer. Ball joints and clutch linkages, that's pretty important in our environment. They seize up quite a bit. Typical complaint we hear is our Jake brake's not working well. Then you find out that the clutch is not returning the last inch because it's binding up. You got to lube those up. We show the drivers where they are, and they get a little proactive on it. The good drivers don't want their trucks broke and they want everything working, so they'll spray them in their barns. Antifreeze, you know, adjust it to 35 below. And on that same note, many different truck manufacturers have dips, little paper strips. You check the condition of your antifreeze. And that goes by whatever manufacturer you have. They each kind of have their own, whether it's a Cummins motor, Mack, they all have their own sticks that you put in there and to test the antifreeze. And then they make chemicals to adjust the antifreeze to protect your motor so you're not eating cylinder liners or the aluminum components aren't getting eaten. So I strongly suggest that you test your antifreeze. Those test strips are like $20 and they'll last you 2 years. Generally, there's an expiration date on those strips, so generally you won't use them all. You end up throwing away 30 or 40 because the time expired on them. But it's a good way to protect your motor. Obviously, grease your truck. You can't stress that enough. Know where the grease fittings are. If you have your driver's grease trucks, which we do here, showing them where the grease fittings are is important. Like if we have a transmission on the floor, we'll actually show them the 2 grease fittings on the side of the transmission while it's on the floor. You know, don't miss these. They're there, and a lot of them will tell you, "Boy, I didn't know they were there." And you know, train the foreman training. You know, whoever's in charge of the, you know, let that guy know so he could train the drivers. But drivers typically they want to know. They don't want to be broke down. Fuel water separators, drain them periodically. You can, there again, a good driver will tell you. We had a driver recently who was saying, "Boy, I'm getting a lot of water lately, and you know, he's telling me every day." And I said, "This is odd." And I'll come to find out we had water in that particular tank, and he was just the guy that was the only one telling me about it. It was a smaller location, and I had a mower tractor. I checked that, but I saw it fueled there, and sure enough, there was a lot of water in the tank. We had to address we got the fuel company, and they addressed it, and so communication there helps out as well. Under vehicle, all these are, I guess, common sense. You check your transmission oil level, and those oil recommendations next to those aren't, you know, there again, don't go by what I'm saying or what we have wrote there. Each truck manufacturer has their own, depending on what rear end, transmission, engine, has their own oil recommendations. Always check with your manufacturer. All this stuff, there again, you're recording that you're documenting, you're maintaining your vehicle, you're showing a pattern that you take care of your equipment. All this stuff very important. Rear suspension, transmission bolts and motor mounts. It's not all the time that you find them. You may only find one on one truck, but that could have been the one, you know, if that bolt fell out, you got a transmission hanging sideways or a motor mount. It's a lot easier to tighten them up than to try to put all that back up in there and then put a bolt back in. And sometimes those bolts, you can't put them in without removing the rest of the mount, and that's no fun. Be proactive on your seals for the transmission differentials, especially your wheel hubs and your PTOs, because they get leaking and they leak more than you realize, or they're only leaking when the PTO is on going down the road. Next thing you know, you got an empty transmission and a very expensive repair. Be proactive on that stuff, and it'll save you money in the long run. Newer trucks are coming through internationals. One of them that's using a hydraulic actuator for the clutch. When you check these, you have to actually, you can't use free play with the driver in the cab like you typically would with a linkage style clutch. You're going to check for a 1/2 inch of play by removing the inspection cover off the clutch transmission housing on the bottom and looking up in there. You're going to want to basically make sure you can stick your finger up between the fork and the throwout bearing. If you can't, you need to tighten that clutch up a little. There again, an expensive repair if you don't stay on it. The clutch starts slipping, and then you got premature, clutch failure, and nobody wants that. Brake hoses, chafing and condition. That's a big one here. Because of, we do a lot of construction work, and the trucks are in and out of gravel pits, and on the side of the road we're ditching. These get loose and they do chafe. Any rubs, replace the hose. You're not supposed to cover up a hose anymore. A lot of guys used to use hose and cut a hose in half and use it as a hose separator. DOT's frowning on that now. They want you to buy the clips and the hose separators or use loom clamps. I guess it's their finding that people were covering up brake hose rubs and they were having failures that possibly caused accidents. Rear brake drum condition. That's an obvious thing. Every brake drum, front, rear, whatever, on the outside of the drum, there's a measurement. It'll say maximum measurement, maximum diameter. And what you got to do, you take that drum and the inside of the drum at the farthest wear point, you need to measure that drum. If that drum exceeds or meets that number, in other words, if it's 16.285, if it's 16 1/4, you got to replace, the drum. That's important. Drums, the prices have come down quite a bit. You can buy a brake drum for $70, $80. If you choose to run that drum again, you can have a drum, explode or crack. And I've gone down the Northway here in Saratoga, Glens Falls, and I've actually seen brake drums on the side of the road. They do explode, and I've seen it in private sector trucks come in with typically it's on trailers with blown drums. It's definitely not a service. Back to the chafing, there we secure all airlines. We use the clips. They're $3, $4 a piece. They just snap over each brake hose. A lot of trucks are coming through with 2 different size brake hoses. They do make those clips with a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch. So the clip is 3/8 on one side, 1/2 on the other. Most of those clips have a hole in them, and you can take zip ties and secure each side of the hose to the clip. And it's something I would recommend because just the clip will stay there. It won't become unhooked. Drive lines, the yokes. Take your hand, shake that drive line. Look at the nut and the washer that holds that yoke on. If you see that washer move a little bit, that is a loose yoke. You're going to have to drop the U-joint out. You're supposed to replace the nut. Sometimes when you find these things, the dealer doesn't have the nut, whatever. You got 2 options. Then you can put some Loctite on that, take it off, clean it, put some Loctite on it, put it back on, and watch it closely because you should replace that with a new nut at some point. Failure to do that, you're either going to have eventually the seal will leak, or you're going to have a driveline vibration, or even worse, you can, the splines on that yoke or the rear end or differential, you can wear them out. And then you got a huge dollar repair. U-joints, something that you should teach the drivers if you have drivers and grease them, is all 4 points on that U-joint should emit grease. They don't emit grease when you grease the U-joint if it's greasable. A lot of them aren't greasable anymore. Then that U-joint should be removed, inspected, replaced, whatever, because generally it means there's a problem. The slip yokes, we don't want to over grease them, but 2 or 3 pumps in a slip yoke, you definitely want to do that. There again, to save the plastic that coats them on the newer ones and on the older trucks, the obvious lubrication. We're recording the rear brake thickness. We went over that. There again, you're just saying that you're documenting your repairs. Inspect all your brake assemblies, check for seized parts. Every spring on our Rockwell equipped trucks, we pull every truck, we pull the wheels, the drums, we get all the salt off the shoes, clean them up, and any seized parts, which is usually about every time, we put a $5 hardware kit in it. The anchor pins are seized, we have to use press to get them out. We replace them, it's $6, $7, and that's one less thing we have to do on the winter service, because typically the summer, they go all summer, nothing seizes up. In the winter service, they pull them off, check them, hey, everything's great, you put it back together. Getting that salt out of there, you're saving your brake shoes too. Typically in this type of environment, we run all salt, but if you don't get that out of there, you won't get a year and a half, 2 years out of your brake shoes. They're rusted. You got to replace them because of rust. And the weight of that salt also makes that lower shoe wear your drums out prematurely, or you'll hear them howling when you stop because the anchor pins are seized. It's just good maintenance. It is a lot of work, but we either do it now or we do it in the fall. And it's a lot easier to be proactive, know our drivers have good brake systems and they're up to snuff. And we don't have to worry about, injuring the public or themselves. Cross member cracks. We don't see a lot of it, but we do see the loose fasteners typically where the plow equipment's mounted. I might add on that, like on your wings and stuff like that, check that stuff over real good, because you can see cracks. You don't know if they've hit ledge or anything like that. And inside the slides of where your wing arms on the wing go up and down, cracks in there. We've seen a lot of that, and it's type of equipment. Every piece of whatever kind of equipment you run, whatever name brand, they all have their typical traits. Your mechanics learn where you have the issues, and that's something you should incorporate that in your PM sheet, to look for that stuff. And just proactive. It just saves a road call or a breakdown when it's 20 below zero. U-bolts and are probably one of our bigger items that we find. It's not on every truck, but front U-bolts, we found a lot of them broke, typically behind the axle, or they're cracked. You'll see with a rust, where there's rust running down the bolt, and definitely be proactive on them. That could be a bad situation if you're not watching out for them. And that's something that the driver should be showed. If you find one, show the driver, hey, you didn't see this, but on your pre-trip, you really ought to look at something like that on the front axle. Probably that guy wants to get home too, safe at night. That's something that'll probably he won't forget, and he'll check that periodically in his pre-trip and post-trip. Draining all air tanks. We do this in our barns. Obviously, everybody has their own structure, but they'll do it, and they'll call me if they're getting, hey, I'm getting a lot of water or oil. Typically, I've had a couple phone calls, hey, I'm draining oil. Bad air compressor or some other component has gone bad and filling up the air system with oil in the air dryer. So there's a needed repair. And that's something, actually, it turned out to be a warranty item. That was a bad air compressor on a fairly new truck. So those types of things, be proactive and air dryer, typically the prices come down less than $200. the air dryer's bad, replace it. When it's 20 below zero and the brakes freeze up, that's no fun. Make sure the air dryer's working, good working order. It's not constantly spitting air. All those types of things are important because we're out in the worst elements. This is apply brakes and check for leaks, typically a two-person thing. We do it a couple different ways. Release the brakes and have a second, guy apply them and walk around the truck slowly. And this is probably how we find most of our air leaks. And the drivers, a lot of times the drivers are alone when they're doing their pre-trip. They'll hear a major leak or notice one, but the minor leaks, this is the time to fix them, no matter how small they are, whether it's a valve or a check valve. We're very proactive on this. Another thing that we're kind of proactive on, a brake chamber, the prices have come down where they're very reasonable from what they were 10 or 15 years ago, $50, $60 for a brake chamber. If they're 2 or 3 years old and they're still originals, I'll put all 4 of them on in the shop on a winter service. At 3 in the morning, I can't call a guy in and have him, we're a long county, we're 80 miles long. So, he could be anywhere, and who wants to do that on the side of the road in the snowbank? So it's being proactive. We're saving money in the long run, and we're keeping our equipment safer and the public safer. Air pressure test to build up time. What you do is you have your truck running, you bring it up 1,500 RPM, and when it's at 90 pounds, it has to go from 90 to 105 pounds in 30 seconds. This is a DOT test. I hear it's probably one of the most controversial tests, but it's done. A lot of trucks are put out of service for it, but it is DOT. Air dryer operation, we went over that, replaced it if needed. Record air governor setting. We do that, just documentation, once again, that you're documenting a repair. Existing, you maintain that you have inspected this component. Work orders. I went over work orders a little bit on the DVIR, how important they are, and whether it's a notebook, a separate piece of paper, whatever, the bigger the operation should be using work orders, smaller barns that have, smaller amount of equipment. There has to be some sort of documentation to cover yourselves. Work orders should be created to communicate any issues found to the mechanic or shop that will be assigned to repair. And, all your parts, your time, even some notes about the repair, extra time needed because this was seized or that was seized. We document all that for the most part. There again, you're just creating documentation to protect you. We use a purchase order system here. We have parts people. So if parts are needed, our shopkeepers will get us the parts in a timely manner, following obviously the protocol of whatever your municipality is set up to purchase parts. Any vehicle that does not pass inspection must be marked out of service in the cab and the keys until it's clear. Now I'll go to say that's our system. Develop your own, your tag out lockout system. Every municipality should have one, and you follow your lockout tag out system. That's just to keep everybody, your own people safe and protect your own people and the public. Nobody wants to see this. And some of this, everybody needs a training program. Not necessarily saying this was a result of any training. It could have been anything that happened here, but this is definitely something you don't want to see. I guess it's time for any questions, and I hope I can answer them.
Feel free to go down on your screen there and type in the chat, ask a question, or feel free to send an email to myself or David Bloodgood, and which should be on the invitation that was sent to you. Thanks for everybody for coming to the NYMER PM presentation. Thank you, Ty, for leading us on this great program. Remember, if you signed in, if you registered for this program, you will get a certificate. If you are with a group of folks, please sign a sign-in sheet. And when your certificate comes, attach it to that as proof that you were in attendance. Once again, we thank you for coming and appreciate you being here. Thank you for what you do and take care.
There's one question.
Yes.
Let's see. Town of Putnam says thank you. Okay. You're welcome.
Awesome.
You're welcome.